Welcome to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, your trusted guide to navigating the future of digital innovation and products in manufacturing. In this episode, Jonathan Scott and I discuss our experiences at the CIMdata PLM Roadmap and PDT conference held May 7th and 8th in Tysons Corner, Virginia. Let's jump right in. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering, the podcast about all things digital related to products, engineering, manufacturing, service, and more. I'm one of your hosts and colleagues, Julianne Grant, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Jonathan Scott.
Hello, everybody.
Hey, Jonathan. Always good to see you. We spent a little time together this week.
We did.
Yes. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Jonathan and I attended CIMdata's PLM Roadmap and PDT conference that was held in Tysons Corner, Virginia. They typically have a spring version and a winter version. And the one coming up in I think it's November, is in Paris. So
yeah. And it's a joint event, right, between CIMdata and Eurostep. And I think that's what causes it to be in the two places, right?
Right, exactly. So the theme this year of this conference was interesting. It's always around PLM and some level of, understanding the technology and the application of the technology. But this year it was along those lines. It was around PLM's integral role in digital transformation from strategy to execution. And the subtitle was Elevating PLM to an Enterprise Business Solution, the PLM's Professional Roadmap to Success. So, as we go through today, we can kind of match back to how well we think that really did with the theme. But I do think that we did cover quite a bit of that. There was a lot of PLM and business discussion this week.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that this is one thing that the of organizers of the event, CIMdata and Eurostep do a great job of, is once they've picked that theme, they bring in topics that are they're not like monolithic. They're not all different speakers saying the same thing, but they all tie to that theme very well, right? And so we had people talking about, the history and the context of PLM, data and research about PLM and how it's doing in the market, and then bits and pieces, some from customers and of course some from the vendors who were there, but about that PLM view of things, right? Past years it's been AI and digital thread and digital twin and things that are offshoots that all are in this space and they're important to talk about. But this year felt like it was bringing it back to the fundamentals and talking about, where have we not gotten it right? How are people getting it right? And what more do we need to do just purely on PLM? And I thought that was good.
Yeah, I agree. And it was actually kind of nice not to have AI be the lead topic of the whole discussion because...
Of course it came up, right?
But of course it did. But it was nice that it was in a context of how it's being applied, either, in an agentic role or, in a analytics role or a, enterprise search role, those kinds of things. Just it's a little bit better application of it. So it framed it a little bit better.
Right. And talked about what you needed to make it work, right? Which I think is also great that I don't know that overall in the conversation we're getting out of that hype phase, but it felt like at the event there were plenty of people saying, yes, it's still being hyped. However, there are things we need to remember about what we have to do to be ready for AI and to put it into real use. And that has to do with the data itself and it has to do with the systems it lives in. And it got us back to sort of centered on what are we doing for our product lifecycle strategies.
Right. Yeah, and I thought there were a good mix of sponsors there too this year. I mean, I think what was nice about it was, it was a few PLM companies. We had PTC, we had Aerospace in there. Didn't see Dassault there. Who else were we thinking about?
Siemens was present, but they didn't have a stand. Yes. They weren't sponsoring, I don't think. But yeah, it was a couple of others, right? There's the A&D PLM Action Group, which is a CIMdata sort of organized thing or administered thing, but it really is a coalition of a bunch of aerospace and defense companies. So it was nice to have them there, and they had a couple of presentations, which were good. Who else was there? We had
Altium, who does a lot of that, ECAD type PLM work, which is definitely a specialty area. And then we had a couple of, people on the peripheral, like Configit, who does the configuration, lifecycle management, Keysight, who does some of the test automation, and Oberon. And they were nice neighbors. They were right across from us.
Right.
But they have an interesting approach on doc management, right?
Yeah, and publishing, right? Which I thought is really interesting. Getting PLM content published out to websites and other places where you need it to go automatically, but you don't want to do it one by one. So it was an interesting capability to be talking about because as much as we talk about automating things in AI, we still have to get a lot of information about our products out to people.
Right, right. Yeah, and I think the other couple that were there were SB Vision. It's kind of like us,
Hmm.
and then Cinequa, which is really focused on some AI capabilities, I believe, for enterprise search.
Right. Yeah, theirs was sort of interesting. But yeah, I think that about rounds out who was there and what they were talking about, which is sort of an interesting mix. I think if you haven't been to the event before, it gives you maybe a picture of what it's like. Is it's not a big show like a 3DX World or a ThingWorks or Realize Live, something like that, or Autodesk University, where there's a trade show floor and booths, and it's not that, right? It feels like a sort of an intimate conversation amongst, I don't know, how many people do you think were there? 150, 200?
Yeah, about 150. Yeah.
Okay.
It usually averages around that, but it's usually a really good audience, highly,
Yeah.
focused group.
Well, and typically practitioners, right? So IT folks, engineering tool folks, IT leaders, right? So like I'm sorry, I'm going to forget his title, but a program director or IT director for Airbus, right, presented.
Oh, yes.
So,
yes.
you get some people, Kenny Swope from Boeing was there, he presented, right? So high-level people who've been doing this a long time and have a lot of good insight. And so you're having really good conversations. So it's that kind of event, right?
Right.
You hear meaningful presentations, you have a lot of good conversations, but it's not a trade show, right?
Right. It was Dr. Heinrich Weimer from
Right.
Airbus.
Right.
Yeah.
I just couldn't remember his title.
Yes. Well, anyway, you're right, and then there was us, of course. We were also in the sponsorship ranks as well. So, but one of the nice perks of being a sponsor is you have the opportunity to do a 10-minute vignette about your business, and it's not supposed to be a pitch. And I thought yours was really interesting this year. On the product digital data foundations. Let's talk just a few minutes about that. I want to make sure we capture some of the important things you were talking about there.
Yeah, it like you said, they ask all of the sponsors not to talk about themselves, but bring something to the table. And what I was hoping to bring to the table was on that theme that they highlighted, talking about what can you be doing. Right. My message was, what can you be doing in the midst of all the noise today? Because I feel like the market's very noisy with AI, with lots of technology conversations. Do you need GraphDB? And are you moving to cloud? And what's your mobile strategy still? And all those are important things, but they can distract you from what are you really trying to accomplish? And the point I was hoping to bring across was you have to think about the capabilities that a business is asking you to bring. And then how do you bring those to the table? And if you don't think about multiple aspects of a capability, and I don't want to go into the whole thing here, but right, if you don't think about people, process, data, and technology,
right,
you're going to miss something. And you're going to maybe have a project that succeeds in deploying a technical solution, but doesn't get adopted. Or maybe people try to adopt it, but they struggle because they don't have the data they need. Or, you've given them a technical solution, but you didn't move the business forward because you tried to keep it working with the same old process. Any number of things could trip it up, but I was hoping to highlight to people there are practical steps you can take. A lot of times you've already got the tools you need. You probably already have a PDM or PLM that you could just expand its footprint to grow your digital thread, or put in some kind of integration platform. I wasn't pitching Clover, right? Because there were lots of other people there doing that with other platforms, but making the point that if you have an integration capability, that can help you grow out your footprint. But just do it step by step. And hopefully that was useful to people.
Yeah, and I think what was interesting about the way you were framing that is because usually you hear a lot about people process technology, but a lot of what was talked about this week was people process data and technology. And I think that was one of your aspects of, making sure people looked at that piece.
Absolutely. And it is a mistake that I think people make. They forget to think about how if your data is in documents, you are not going to get to a model-based strategy. Right? To get to a model, you have to take the data out of the document and you have to look at it differently. You have to present it and it has to behave differently. And that's a big step. It's not a simple, trivial thing. It's not a data migration, right? I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something different.
Right.
And there were a lot of people who mentioned that and brought it up in the context of the tech too, right? Saying, think about how long you're going to keep these systems. Think about how long you need to keep the data. Of course, our aerospace friends always bring that up, right? 50-year life of data, 50 or more. Well, you're not going to have the same systems, whether you call them PDM, PLM, or whatever they're going to be 20 years from now. But you have to keep the data.
Right. Yeah, that was really interesting perspective about the airline industry and how long you have to keep how long planes stick around and how much data you need to keep for that to support compliance requirements. Very interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the takeaways in some of those presentations. I mean, I for me, it's always good to get a reminder that everyone is still trying to figure this out. So I think that, that there is no silver bullet to PLM and that everyone has to kind of come at it from their organization. Although you're starting to see people come at it, a little more methodically and, building, executive support and that kind of a thing. And I think it was good to hear some of those stories. What were some of your key takeaways, Jonathan?
I think one that you just said was absolutely a takeaway for me is that PLM succeeds when it has leadership support and when everyone from the leadership down can tell a clear, coherent message about the value, right? And we heard that from a couple of different speakers. And we hear it from CIMdata too.
From Hollister, I think it was Stacy Burgart, I think it was.
Yep, that was one place we heard it for sure.
Yes.
And we hear it even from CIMdata. They bring it up regularly.
Yes. They do.
And it was so interesting. One of the questions in the conversation was about people who are doing it right, how did you learn to do it right? How did you get there? And there was no silver bullet, to your point, but there was agreement, right? You didn't hear anybody dissenting and saying, oh, well, we did it without. It was no big deal. So I think that was an important one.
Yes.
I mean, another one that I heard, it's tangentially related to that, is we as an industry are not connecting PLM well enough to a business case and making the case to the business why they need it. Like what pieces are missing, what are the capabilities we need, and how is it going to impact our bottom line or our top line or both?
Right.
And I think that was another interesting one. There wasn't anything prescriptive about how to do it, but the need to do it seemed to be clear.
Well, it really shined the light that PLM hasn't done a great job making the connection to the boardroom. So, if you're looking at, how to improve some of those financial metrics, reducing costs, the interesting stat that was highlighted to me was that, manufacturing costs far outweigh the R&D costs that in the engineering side. And so when people are looking at cutting costs, they're not really necessarily looking at, the little bit of engineering that's happening or, the justification isn't necessarily around that. It's really around the manufacturing costs. So it made a lot of sense to me. And I thought that maybe that's some work on how we message things a little bit differently, and how we could do a better job communicating to the C-level.
That's right. And it's not a popular message, but I think I agree with you. It was spot on, right? We shouldn't ignore that fact that if you're a CEO or a board member, your job is to look after the profit of the company. Now, not all organizations are for profit and that kind of thing, but by and large, it's an important point to remember, and PLM can get lost when it doesn't keep that in mind. And I think that was my last takeaway was that PLM is struggling a bit, right? I should be clear what I mean. I think the software, adoption of the software systems is struggling. People need to do it, and they need to do it more and more as an approach, managing the life cycle of their products and trying to do it digitally. So the demand is there, but there's this gap to, are people implementing? Are they getting the business case made, and are they doing it and really advancing it? And it feels like, no, we're stuck a little bit. And I appreciated the fact that the theme can help people think about how they get it unstuck. But that was another thing I felt like I talked about a fair amount.
Right. No, I would agree. And I think that there's a lot more thinking I want to be doing around that particular area of how we present PLM or, the value of PLM to the business. I think there's a lot of work that marketing teams can do around that to help improve some of the value message there. The other one I really liked was I enjoyed the Hitachi Energy presentation. I think she really had a very methodical way of her plan, of how her rollout was going to go. And it sounded like, in some conversations with Hitachi that there's a lot of things going on internally, right? So they're trying to do their own digital transformation, and the energy business was one of those that's really taking PLM seriously.
I agree. I mean, I think she didn't even necessarily mention it, and the she here was Caroline Gustafsson.
Thank you.
And her background slide reminded me like, oh, no wonder you have a challenging environment, right? So I had forgotten that Hitachi Energy was a combination of ABB and Hitachi, right? So two energy giants coming together, trying to merge businesses and operate out of Japan and Sweden, and now trying to transform in a market that's evolving quickly, right? So a lot of what she was talking about was power distribution, smart grid, related to renewables and things like that. It's like, okay, in a market that's changing that rapidly, now dealing with tariffs, but trying to transform. I agree. She had a very nice sort of methodical, here's what we're trying to do, and here's how we view our business. And the key theme I got from what she said was getting from everything as a snowflake and ETO into more of a CTO mode, but not thinking of it as a pure shift, right? It's a spectrum, and you got to get there over time. But to look at a complex product and set of systems like they deliver as a product, it seemed pretty neat to me that they had that kind of foresight and plan.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. What was another of your favorite presentations, Jonathan?
There were a lot of great ones. And that's, I think talking about the event, I would encourage our audience, definitely think about it, right? If you're into this space and you enjoy our podcast, this is a good event for thinking about these sorts of things. I think my favorite topic was from Dr. Martin Eigner. So for those of you that don't know, yeah, he is. He's great. For those of you that don't know him, he is one of the founding fathers of PLM. He's been around for a long time in the subject area, had his own product for a while. So he gave a great overview of the past 40 years of PLM, right? And where we came from and where we're at now. And that gives such a good perspective on, what are we seeing now? What is it, noise, or is there a real change in the industry? And I think there is. There's a change happening in the industry in terms of technology stack, and it is not just shift to cloud, right? And he pointed that kind of thing out. But he pointed out how it's going to connect to the other big trends that we hear about digital thread and AI, and how technology is going to contribute, how new vendors are going to contribute, how people looking at their business differently is going to contribute and shift all that. So for me, it was a great sort of synopsis of where we are and a look at the point in time where we find ourselves, right, to help give us that sort of compass toward what is going to matter moving forward.
Yeah. He really did a great historical perspective as well that I enjoyed. It's always good to remember the roots of things.
And I hope when I'm at the stage of career that he's at, I'm as active as he is in doing what he's doing. I mean, it was just like action-packed and chock full of information.
Sharp as a tack, he is. Yeah, for sure. What's really great about the Aerospace and Defense Action Group is that they really go through a process of primary and secondary research on different topics like digital thread, digital twin. And this one was on digital thread. And they had some really interesting use cases. They went through a whole process where they identified, I don't know, I forget how many they said, but there was like 40 or 50 different use cases they came up with digital thread alone, which, really helps paint the picture that digital thread is not a thing. It is many things. And I think, in some of our previous podcasts, we talk about it creates a tapestry, and there's all these things that come together and they all overrelate and overlap and, help build the value of that data. So I'm looking forward to hearing that outcome.
And as an engineer, it really resonated with me, my own biases. I like to think of things neat and orderly, right? So when I hear, there's 40 or 50 different use cases we heard about, I like to think, but it's a tapestry. It all weaves together and it's just different things, right? And that's not what they said, right? What they said was, the vendors had one take on it and the users had another take. And then the people who we surveyed who weren't part of the action group, they had another take. And everybody's thinking something different. And what somebody calls a use case for somebody else, that's a workflow of connected use case. So it's like all over the road. And that's good. It's a good reminder. We're all excited about digital thread. Lots of us are, right? We see how it's going to contribute to digital twin, how it's going to give us a data set to help train AI. So it's really important, but we're probably not all talking about the same thing. So we got to get on the same page to make progress. So I found that very useful too. I agree.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, that about wraps it up from my perspective on this event. I mean, I think overall, I would highly encourage people, like you're saying, if you're in this market and you're active in PLM and you're at your company, this is a great learning opportunity to talk with other users and to talk with vendors who could help you on the peripheral of what you're doing to help build more value.
I agree. I think they do a great job of organizing the event and bringing good content together and people who can have conversations from very different perspectives. And here's the other great part is it's not a year away, right? So if you are interested in this, you can make the trip to Paris. Typically, you hear a few of the same speakers, a few of the same sponsors, a few new ones, a few different ones, that sort of thing. So it mixes it up. So even for folks like us, I expect to get a lot of value out of going and hearing some of the same things and some new things in the fall. But it's a great event.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So check it out. It's in La Défense in France, the early November, I believe. So check the CIMdata website on that. Well, thanks so much, Jonathan. It was a pleasure to be with you this week and attend this conference.
Likewise.
And, yes, always a good experience. And if anyone has any questions on the CIMdata event, feel free to shoot us an email or make a comment on this podcast, or feel free to reach out to the CIMdata team, or we can put you in contact with them if you don't know who to reach out to. But with that, we thank you for your time today. We hope you found this valuable. And until next time, everybody, stay sharp.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thanks for being here and listening to this episode of Stay Sharp in Digital Engineering with Razorleaf. If you like this podcast, please be sure to hit the like button or subscribe to our podcast on your favorite podcast platform, or check us out on YouTube. If you have any questions or have more ideas around topics we should be covering for our Digital Twin series, please leave us a comment or send us an email to podcast@razorleaf.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, everybody, stay sharp.